short stories about Prespa. Austrian geographer Herbert Boedendorfer talks about Prespa and birdwatching projects and shares his thoughts about touristic development.
I'm Herbert Boedendorfer. I'm an Austrian geographer. I studied in the 70s and wrote PhD paper on spatial planning, city history, development. And then I worked as a teacher of English and geography for about 25 years before I retired at the very early age of 51 to be able to travel to places like this that are unique. My first big trips took me to Asia, Sri Lanka and Thailand and Malaysia, Indonesia. Then, because I was a mountain hiker, I went to Nepal several times, where Austria had a development project. I always planned it like this. I asked the foreign ministry in Austria or NGOs, do you have projects in the country where I want to travel? And this is how I came to Nepal and visited Austrian people who worked there, knew the country and could show me the country better than if I had been there only as a tourist. And shortly before I had met Eva, and we traveled together 5 times to Nepal. Then I continued in the same way in Africa, in Ethiopia, Kenya, always documenting Austrian projects, converting them into slideshows that I showed in schools. So I still was a teacher when I was at home, but free. And then about more than 20 years ago, we went to the Cape Verdean Islands because the town where we lived had a partnership town there.
And which town do you live in Austria?
In Leibniz, in the south of Austria, in Styria. And there we came on an island, beautiful landscape, a little bit like the Canary Islands, but more African and drier. And we started to develop ecotourism, just for fun, out of my own interest, because I wanted something useful to do. I found a very nice little lagoon near our house with interesting birds. We brought over an ornithologist, and he showed me the value of this place in ornithological respect, and I realized that this place attracted birdwatchers from all over the world because there were so many endemic birds there that they couldn't see anywhere else, and they were listers who were crazy after birds.
What is the name of the place there in
the Santiago Island. There are 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 islands, inhabited islands, and this is the biggest. We had developed this kind of tourism, and now it's running. At the moment we have guests there, and we have our guides, and we have guests there, and we have guides, and we have drivers whom we can rely on, and there are groups of mostly birders and photographers coming from all over the world. The first time I came here was in Prespa, here to Prespa, was in 2012, because we'd heard of the crisis in Greece, and that tourists were not going there, and that made the country even more attractive to us. So we immediately booked a ferry trip to Igoumenitsa, and then we drove over to here. And I had heard of Prespa before from my father, who had been on the Balkans during the war.
He fought in the Balkan Wars, you mean?
He was in the German army, because he was born in part of under the monarchy, in a part where they spoke Slovenian, and he spoke perfect Slovenian and Croatian, and so he was very useful on the Balkans. He was born in the middle of the war, 16. He could go to a German primary school, but then he had to go to a Slovenian-speaking grammar school. And when the war started, the Second World War started, he was a citizen, Yugoslav citizen. But then Hitler invaded Yugoslavia in 1941 and came down until Crete. And he was drafted to the military after that, 1941. And he had never been here. He told me about Prespa and Ohrid, that these were very special lakes, hidden in the mountains.
But without being here, he had
heard about it. I had heard it from him, and it had been on my radar somehow. And we used this trip in 2012 when we had our boats with us, and we came here over the mountains and then continued towards the east.
It's a good thing your father survived, and we have you here today.
Yeah.
Okay, so your first time in Prespa?
It was 2012, and it was evening, and when I came over these mountains here, I realized immediately that this was a very special place. For me, it's unique in Europe. Do you know this fairy tale of the seven dwarfs that live behind the seven mountains? Here you have to cross seven mountains, and then you come to this paradise. Unbelievable.
What did you do when you had a specific goal when you first came, or you just came to explore the place?
We had our sea kayaks on our camper van, and we took them down on the lake, and we thought that we don't want the local boats, we go by kayak. And we caused panic with the birds, because they are used to the boats you are using here every day with the engine. They don't mind. But when we turned up with yellow and red kayaks,
silently,
it was silent, but they were not used to it. They were in panic. They fled immediately. I have now gone with boats with your friend from next door here, Lazarus, and with Georgios. And you can go close to the pelicans; they don't fly away. But when you come with a new boat, they are surprised. You chase them away. So if you use boats, always use the same boats on the same day, on the same route. You don't scare the birds. That's what they do in Kakini. And then we came back every second year almost, and now we're coming every year. And I haven't seen much change, which means that the work, that what you are protecting, was successful. Because I haven't seen big developments since then.
In a good sense, you mean?
This is a question we might have to discuss. What kind of development do you want? Who wants it? For whom? What do you want to protect? Who protects what? For whom? These are questions I ask myself when I come into a nature reserve or in a national park. Like in Eastern Africa, which are the most beautiful national parks you can imagine, and they have made them for us, and they threw out the local population. That's not the way to do it.
In Prespa, it's been a tradition now. Maybe it was the first time that it was mentioned through in between NGOs, environmental NGOs, the sense of caring for human as well as nature. Because Prespa Basin always had a human presence, and this is how it was formed and developed, with the human presence. I mean, their fields, their animals. Sure. So what is trying to be protected is also the flora and fauna, but also some practices, human practices, that help this environment be what it was. But of course things change. You have been coming here with groups of Austrians mostly for birdwatching.
Germans and birdwatchers, yes. Well, it took us a few years to set up the system because here it's not so easy to find accommodation for a group. We mostly need single rooms, so we need 5, 6, 7 rooms. This is about the size of your small hotels. And I needed to learn the places where the birds are and which birds are here. And then we combined these trips with Kerkini, which is a completely different lake. Actually, what we are offering is a trip to 2 different lakes, 2 different stories. One lake, artificial, shallow, warm, rich in nutrients, full of birds, but it's artificial. And this is a deep lake, cold lake, little nutrients, not so many fish, no people around, or very few, and completely different landscape. So it's a big contrast between these 2 parts of the trip. Yes, and I know that there are a few other bird watching groups coming. I once met one, English. This area cannot compete in terms of special birds or birds' numbers. Only the pelicans are special, of course. They are unique. They come here because it's quiet. This is their breeding place. But there are more birds in the Danube Delta, or more birds in Africa or Costa Rica. But I'm quite sure that all the people who come here are impressed by the landscape and by the purity, and there are no power lines, no motorways, nothing. Yeah, it's very natural. But I know, of course, that we can do nature protection in the rainforest. We protect the rainforest. But in all other cases, we need to interfere. We need to manage nature. If you look at what they're doing in Kerkini, they need grazing there. They have these huge buffalo herds and cows and horses. Without that, everything would overgrow, invasive plants and local plants. On the Balkans, there is no nature protection without grazing program. Yeah? Also here, your places, the open places that you have here in the forest, they are in the process of overgrowing. And you need sheep, goats, cows for grazing. Everywhere in Europe, it's the same problem. If you want grassland, you need animals.
Well, what does a birdwatcher do?
Nature is an endless book containing many, many chapters. And there are people who have never learned to read in this book. I think the perfect idea of a good life for a Greek is to sit in a cafe in Athens and read the newspaper and discuss politics with his friends. Right?
Could be.
Could be. And then there are people who learn, mostly as kids, to read in nature, to see that there is something out there. And the most excessive group of living beings that you can watch and study, most excessive, are the birds. Because they sing outside, they wake you up in the morning. I must close, at that time of the year, if I want to sleep, I must close the window in the morning, because birds are so loud outside my house. I have a bad conscience if I do that, because I love bird song. So birds are an easy way to connect ourselves with nature, reconnect with nature. And we need connection with nature. If we want to save it and if we want to protect it, we need to know what it is. So birds are easy to watch, and all the people like birds. When I talk to people who are not bird watchers, they immediately start telling me, are you interested in birds? And they start to tell me their interest, their experience with birds. But there are 2 different groups we can separate. Bird watchers maybe they have good binoculars, they have good optics, and they love the details of the feathers, they love to watch them. Sometimes they draw the birds. They are aesthetics. They go for the aesthetics of birds. By the way, in these Balkan wars we talked about, they had the first good binoculars. The English officers had binoculars. Before that, bird watching had been boom, and you shoot the bird, and then you have it, and then you study it. That was bird watching. And in these wars on the coast here and in Thracia and Dardanelles, when they had spare time from killing each other, they went bird watching. They were well-educated young gentlemen from England, and they invented bird watching in these wars, in the First World War, here. So this is one way. You love the beauty of birds because you can see them with good binoculars or a spotting scope. And then, depending on your character, you are a collector or you are not. If you are receptive to a virus, if you're a collector, you can start collecting books, can start collecting anything, whiskey bottles or whatever. And so there are listers, people who want to see all the birds of Greece, all the birds of the Western Palearctic, of Europe, and some of them are quite addicted and spend all their free time and all their money in trips where they can find new birds.
Collecting, you mean a photograph of a bird?
Some are content if they see it and tick it, make a tick, they cross it. And then there are others who now have the modern cameras. Modern cameras are immensely powerful. The last 20 years have brought a huge development and advance. Cameras are faster, they are more powerful in light. You can shoot birds at very low light, at huge speed. Huge speed. You can't see it, and the camera catches it. 30 frames a second. It's unbelievable. This makes people addicted in another way. They want the photo. And they don't, some of them don't even care so much and mind about the species, about the ecology, or they're not interested in that, into the natural history of the bird, but they want the picture, the photo. And they hide, they wear camouflage clothes. I take these people to the right places, and sometimes I even call them the birds. Now it's breeding season, so I restrict this, but I try to find the places where birds are easy to photograph.
And bird watchers stand still for hours.
Yeah. But you need to keep these two groups apart. The tickers, the bird watchers, they want to see new birds every day. Whereas the photographers, they come back 2 or 3 times to this little stretch of coast where the reeds are gone and where the fish come to spawn and where the herons are, and you get wonderful heron pictures there. And they go there 3 days in a row to take good pictures, better pictures. Whereas the ticker wants to go somewhere else where he can see a new bird. So you can put these people into one group. They start quarreling. They kill each other after 2 days. Yeah.
Maybe this is a question that has no definite answer, but do you think that Prespa would be nice to stay as it is, or would it be nice to have a development towards some direction, birdwatching tourism, for example?
Birdwatching tourism wouldn't change much, because the maximum you would be getting is a few groups in spring, 10 people maximum. That wouldn't change. You wouldn't need other different infrastructure. You wouldn't need other roads. What you could need, if you wanted to have birdwatching tourism, you could need local guides. Because even if an experienced guide comes with a group, he always needs the local expertise. He needs to know somebody who knows the place here, who knows the roads, the tracks where he can take people. This kind of tourism wouldn't change much. Or fishing. People are crazy for birds. Other people are crazy for fishing. Other people are crazy for the opera. They drive from one opera to the other to hear their tenor or their soprano. And the fishing people would come here also, in small groups. This would be on a small scale. But it could be run by private accommodation. In all of these villages here, there is not a single, or there are very few private rooms for tourists. But if they have 3 or 4 bungalows, little huts, they could accommodate one of these fishing groups, hiking similar, no big groups. So this wouldn't change much. What really would change much is what I heard about Albania, where they are now developing the coast with American money, building hundreds of villas. This changes everything. This changes the whole economy of the region.
I would like you to tell me what you enjoy the most, you and Eva as well, your wife, while you are in Prespa.
The view of the mountains, if you walk over the swimming bridge at Agios Achillios, the view of the mountains, the swing of the mountain line, especially when there is snow on it, this has a calming effect. We come here, when we first see the lake from the saddle on the road up there, it calms us immediately. And what most interests me then in all these topics that we talked about touristic development and planning, is the question, who has the power to define a place? This is, for me, the most interesting question of geography, because we saw many instances in rural areas where touristic development was brought in from the outside, and the local people didn't want it, but they weren't asked. But do the local people have the power to define? Does the state has the power to define? Do the foreigners have the power to define a place? These are serious questions, and they have to be solved in a way.
In an ideal world, maybe, some kind of a council or a committee of all these people maybe should get around the table and discuss, because everyone brings an idea or a need.
It needs to be talked over.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.